Kevin Osido, and he is here to basically just go through what we have on the dailies. Welcome, Kevin. Good to have you. And we'll start off with the Standard and the headline: Politics of Census in the Uhuru Succession. So, population figures will not only help in resource allocation, but also building ethnic alliances and projecting outcome of 2022 presidential election. So, the census, of course, a very emotive issue, and as much as many may not have paid much attention to it right now, it is due to be done. But maybe just help break it down as to why this is such an emotive issue.
This is quite significant. Three major things to look at. One is, of course, the Uhuru succession and his legacy. And that the legacy, in my view, is going to be determined by two major things. One, the ability to unite the country, because you know that for the first time in our history, the political history of the Great Republic of Kenya, we have been sent to two elections, and that has been more or less calmed down by the handshake, which is the building bridges to unity. The second factor would be the 2022 elections, which is really the major concern, I think, to most politicians. But the third biggest issue, in my view, is devolution and service delivery, and because
even resource allocation.
Indeed, and that is what now makes the census much more focus with regards to devolution, because the Commission on Revenue Allocation towards the end of last year indicated a change to its formula, and this is the third time that the formula is going to be changed, noting that we had the first one happening 3 years after devolution. And so last year, CRA made a proposal that one of the core things, actually three major things that they are going to be looking at, would include the ability of counties to generate revenue. And you note that in our country and in most African countries, the number of the populace, which then determines the total mass of those who are employed, who then contribute to the GDP, would then determine how much a country can be able to allocate in terms of resources towards national, the GDP of the country. And attached to that then is CRA said we are no longer going to be looking at population, and so we look at the second issue, which is service delivery. So how is the county performing with regards to water, for example, water services, health services, education, so much such that the amount of services that are demanded by the citizens then will determine how much a county will be able to receive, which is why the politicians are now gravitating around the total number of people within their counties, because that will the number then will determine how much resources are taken to the county. And Mike, again, the other issue would be to look at then what is the demand for services in those counties, and how are counties fiscally responsible with regards to the resources that they've already been given. Are they only spending it on trips and salaries, or what is the total amount of resources and revenue that is being spent on services? Because then that is what needs to interest the citizens. So the last thing probably is to look at the public participation modalities in this process. Kenyans need to consider a census a very important event in our lifestyle, indeed a very important exercise, because this is going to determine the future of the country, and so much so that we should not leave it to the political class, because you already can tell that people are looking at how many people do we have in our county, as opposed to how much can we be able to generate internally, so that we're able to use that amount to provide services.
And to be honest, it just adds up to the fact that it's about resources. Mainly it is about, that's one of the key issues, of course, that politicians are going to be looking for, which is not necessarily a bad thing if the resources are going to be put into the right use, because that's why they're there. But also another question that I think that needs to be paid attention to is who is going to conduct the census. Because that's another thorny issue. You know, we know that during election, they say sometimes it's not how many people vote, but it's those who count the votes. And therefore, could this be also another area that we should be very careful and keen on who actually does the census?
You note that especially for the frontier counties development council members, the ASAL areas have been very vocal about this issue. And this is for two major reasons, in my view. One is that the northern part of Kenya has been marginalized for very many years, almost 55 years, if we are to take away the devolved number of years that we have had. And so the concern at that point would be, why has that area been marginalized? Of course, we'll talk about sessional paper number 10 of 1965, which made preference to various corners of the country and the reforms that have since taken place. But then the question is, in 2019 moving forward, is that the kind of picture that you want to be able to have? And so that is why the person who conducts the census becomes very critical. But you note that within the legal framework of Kenya, we have the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics, which is domiciled within the Ministry of Planning or Treasury, which then is why we have the photo of the CS Bwana Rotich here, because then that is really his responsibility. But much more fundamentally is the resources to be able to undertake a census. Because these are people who you expect that every Kenyan will be counted to the last man and to the last gentle lady. So what would that mean? It means that we have to talk about transparency issues with regards to census. You note that the last one which we had in 2009, we had a lot of issues around inflation of figures, some areas having been, given lesser numbers, certain corners of the country saying, oh, historically we have been the majority. How come this time round we are number 4 or we are number 6? And so that census, in my view, was not taken quite in a manner that would guarantee a sustainable process, even for national development and indeed service delivery, if we are to talk both functions of national and county governments. But then the question is, what lessons did we learn then, and how do they inform the census that we are today talking about? And the other concern, again, would be the delimitation, because we have, of course, the 2022 elections coming up. We have boundaries question that is also around the corner. And so this calls for a platform for coordination and collaboration between ministries, departments, and agencies of government, so that then the question of who then does the census is quelled at that level, that we are able to determine whose responsibility is it to be able to provide resources for the census, whose responsibility is it even to hire the clerks. You know that lately we've had lots of KNBS, Kenya National Bureau of Statistics, more or less every week they are on media, both mainstream and social, telling people whatever you are seeing, the adverts are fake. You know, this is fake, this is fake, because we haven't called for clerks and applications. That then generates the intensity of interest, which then begs the question, so how do you bring in the public to be able to own the process of a census? Because this is happening every 10 years. And then the question is, lessons learned from the last census to what we can be able to put in place this time round. And then the possibility and the ability of the political class not politicizing the census process and making it a process that then invalidates the reason. Because I think for me a census is a very important process. Since the time of Jesus Christ, when people are being asked to go back to their homes, Jesus was born in Jerusalem when his parents, for those of us who read the good book, when his parents had gone for a census process to be counted. So you note that it becomes very important for lessons that we can learn from history to be able to inform our future. And so I think that the census for Kenya is a process that needs to be taken very, very seriously, and is a process that then is supposed to be used to inform the future direction.
All right, and that's a story that's on the Standard, so make sure you get yourself a copy of the Standard and just see the intrigues that surround the census and why you, as a citizen of this wonderful country, should take this very, very seriously, because it has implications for the future. Let's also look at page 3, and this is a story that we have been following up on, and Rita Tinina also followed on this, and the state told to pump on the brakes for car-free days plan. And this is the plan by the government to introduce car-free days, and all this is in an effort to try and decongest the CBD. But there are concerns that are being raised as to whether there has been forward thinking of this particular plan, and part of those are, of course, things to do with, for instance, what alternatives have been given for transport into the city, into the CBD. And when you ask people to leave their cars at home because they'll not be able to access the CBD, what alternative measures have you put in place to ensure that they get to their places of work efficiently?
Two things in my view, Mike. One is that national planning has to move forward. And so, for instance, if Nairobi was designed in 1963, for example, for 70,000 people, owning 25 or 2,500 cars, and which is then why we have what we have today, history informs the future. And so it means, therefore, that in 2019, we need to put certain measures in place. The only issue I have with this is public participation. And our Constitution of Kenya 2010, which was promulgated on the behest of sweat and blood of many Kenyans, I think is being taken for granted. Because this is not the first time we're hearing about this. You know that almost 2 months ago when the governor of Nairobi City County said no matatus in the CBD, Kenyans suffered, and that suffering was not for the first time. We had the late Mheshimiwa Michuki, who gave us many days for trekking without vehicles. The question is, do we ever learn from some of these processes? And the people who advise government, the policymakers who sit and think and plan and recommend that some of these decisions need to be put in place, where is the place of the common citizen? Because I'll give you an example. Most of these people are people who are driven in siren cars, you know, where when they are approaching, we hear some sounds.
Traffic is cleared,
and traffic is
go
cleared
on the wrong side of the road.
And then it goes up to their doors. The door is opened, they walk in, they sit there, they meet people, they do what they want to do. The same thing happens when they are going back to their houses. I want to challenge them that even as they think about a car-free Nairobi city, can they consider walking on the streets of this great city so that then they are able to have a feel? The second issue is, can we be able to learn from certain parts of the country? If you go to Asia, Southeast Asia, Malaysia, Singapore, even Thailand, they have BRT systems. But it's a system that works because you're able to tell what time your bus is coming. You have a ticket that has already been paid for, and you're able to even time yourself and say, I'll leave here at 8. I'm sure by 5 minutes to 9, I will have arrived, and so I can deal with my issues. It is not the same for Nairobi, because now the concern is, where will we, for example, park our cars? They're saying you go park your car at Uhuru Park. How many cars can that place accommodate? When the railway line was done from Syokimau, some of us tried it and we went and parked vehicles there. But you can imagine even the struggle and the hassle that you go through to get into the train. So the question then is, Mombasa Road, look at the traffic. Thika Road, look at the traffic. How do we deal with that number, that massive tranche of cars against people that the same government expects to contribute to national building? So I think that this should have been tested, at least not with 64 buses, a small number of buses in a few streets. And then there should have been social halls, you know, allow platforms for the citizens to come and share. I have met people on the streets and in restaurants in this great town who have very good ideas, including how we can be able to do, you know, underground tunnels in this city. And we didn't have to import 64 buses to make Kenyans go through this kind of suffering. Because as far as I'm concerned, this is a suffering that is going to delay so many things. It's going to affect a number of services that I think Kenyans are expected by the government to support the same government to deliver. So much more thinking is needed in this process. I think the CS needs to consider public participation. The people who advise government need to, for this one, quote unquote, do a benchmarking in some countries and see how it is working.
And well, that's the fear, Kevin, because the truth of the matter is there is fears that the benchmarking was done, but all they did was went and saw, for instance, some of the cities that you've quoted and come and try and implement it without looking at the thinking behind it, such that provide avenues. For instance, you may have the BRT system in the UK working, but they also have what they call the tube or the underground system, which we do not have. We
so
also
you have
do not
as many
trams.
Alternatives.
So there are alternatives which are there, and having the BRT system is not just the BRT on its own. It has supporting structures that ensure that it works. The other thing that I had the CS say is that they're not even going to allow bicycles into the CBD, which one might contest. I mean, if I was, say, for instance, coming from Karen or Ngong, I might be willing to cycle into the city to avoid using any other means, and that is a greener way of doing it. It is also healthy. But now, if you tell me I cannot get my bicycle into the city, then what alternative do I have? So maybe, like you say, public participation is required, and hopefully the piloting is just a way of trying to get this tested and put structures into place to ensure that it works.
And Mike, maybe one more thing is that government needs to also adopt a people-centered governance system. You know, it doesn't have to be Wakenya ni sharti ni lazima mfanye. The government must not force, you know, things on people. Otherwise, Kenyans will say, let's sit back and see.
Absolutely.
And when people do that, I think that's where we begin to see frictions between citizens and government.
And to be honest, a challenge to our leaders, once this system is implemented, can we see you walking on the streets of Nairobi?
Yeah.
Is it safe enough for you to walk in the streets of Nairobi? Not all of us have bodyguards. Not all of us have, aids. So when you're making some of these decisions, ensure that it's decisions that work for everybody, including yourself. So lead by example. Sure. We've seen that the president for Rwanda, Kagame, actually implements and walks into the office on car-free days. But moving away from that, we'll wait and see how that goes. On page 5, we also have an interesting story here, and this is to do with politics in Ukambani. Kalonzo should retire, says MCAs. There seems to be a lot brewing under Kalonzo's feet. We remember there were 3 governors who came together. That's Charity Ngilu, we have Alfred Mutua and Kifutha Kibwana, basically coming to say that it's time up for Kalonzo Musyoka.
I would say it's not yet time up for Mheshimiwa Kalonzo Musyoka. And this is why, this is to say that there has to be a transition process. There's going to be a day when Mheshimiwa Kalonzo will retire. Just the same as is a day when the former doyen of politics, Jaramogi, retired. There was a day when Mzee Kenyatta retired. There will be a day when the former prime minister will retire. This is the same for each and every one of us in our own different spheres of influence and whatever we are doing out there. So I don't think it is right for some MCAs to sit and push a retirement card to Mheshimiwa Kalonzo Musyoka. Ceteris paribus, all those factors remaining constant, we have expectations that citizens have of their leaders. I think it would be much more fundamental if the MCAs engage the citizens so that then they are able to provide proposals and issues that I'm sure if you submit to Mheshimiwa Kalonzo, he would pick it up and use the building bridges to unity process to champion for the people of Ukambani. It is also not right, in my view, to say that, yes, he needs to retire because there is nothing much he has been able to do. This is almost similar to all the corners of this country. And that is why the other day we had His Excellency the President saying, this talk about development, musinilete mimi, because people are looking for certain things. And if the MCAs have been charged with the responsibility of 1, representing the people from Ukambani, 2, making laws that are supposed to be responsive of their counties to deliver services to the people, I think they should not send that to a one-man's door, who is then Kalonzo Musyoka. They need to ensure, or rather look for opportunities through which Kalonzo can be able to help that part to be able to benefit from the national cake. Otherwise, I am afraid that as we already are seeing 2022 political drums being pumped and pushed forward, this is going to be a process that is going to continue. And I think it's already happening because we are seeing people like Professor Governor Kifutha Kibwana being, pumped up to be presidents, and they're already mobilizing and saying we have to be because we are performing with the little resources we have. We have had leaders at the highest apex of leadership. They've not been able to deliver. But you see, already you are giving Mheshimiwa Kalonzo's supporters an opportunity to come and ventilate and also to deal with your own way of looking at it. So they have time to prepare their revenge card. They have time to prepare their narrative around protecting Kalonzo Musyoka and the politics of Ukambani, which in my view is going to derail a lot of processes that are supposed to ensure development of the region. But lastly, Mike, we have devolved governance,
right,
which then MCAs sit at the apex of decision making. Let them make the decisions that Mheshimiwa Kalonzo did not make during his time.
Absolutely. And just before we wind up, we have one more story here, which I think could be of interest to many Kenyans, particularly if you're intending to travel within the year. Testing times at Nyayo House as Kenyans rush for new passports. There is a deadline for the new e-passport. And of course, as usual, Kenyans are well known for waiting for the very last minute. So this is still happening, and it is a gridlock right there with the immigration office also trying to digitize everything. So you make the application online, you make your payments online. However, you still have to go physically for the picture to be taken and for you to pick your passport. But of course, a challenge. Have you taken your new generation passport, Kevin?
I have, but I think, as you rightfully said, as we consider to digitize, I don't have to be there physically, but if I have to be, let those services be devolved to the regions. I know there are certain areas that have immigration offices, But then that also needs to be made much more easier for the citizens, because not everybody will be able to go there. We have elders, we have people with various disabilities who may really not consider even having that new generation passport a priority. So how government is going to ensure that all citizens' concerns and needs are put in place and are taken care of is something that I think takes us back to what I would consider the one punch for this discussion is public participation. How do we involve the citizens in all these processes?
There was a proposal to have passports also applied for and processed at Huduma centers. I don't know how far that has gone, because that would decongest Nyayo House.
Indeed it would. I think one of the concerns is that the initial preliminary stages, you can have them at Huduma houses, like filling in the form, having your documents, and then they have to be sent to Nyayo House where you have to go physically, which I think is really not meant to be the case. It should be, in my view, like the ID card, which then you can go pick an abstract, and then you go to Huduma Center, then you're given like 4 to 7 days, you go and pick your new generation ID. So if we can adopt that kind of system, I think it would make Kenyans excited about this, and we'll see as many people going to have the document, because the process has been made easier.
All right, and that's where we're going to wind up our newspaper review on the Nation, Daily Nation. We have